within Eastern Orthodoxy, you have their patriarchs teaching the very same thing. You have it on their official website. Sad, you've shown that as well, their official website as well. So I want to be very clear. What was odd in the panel was you had Christopher and you had Trent really debating against the position that goes against the very church Jay Dyer and Father Deacon claimed to be a part of. You know, it really isn't as simple as Jay pretending that he can deny what his own bishops, patriarchs, and priests have officially taught. In fact, as we saw, he called his own patriarch a heretic because the patriarch agrees with the position. I mean, that's tough. In Eastern Orthodoxy, you're not in communion with the church if you openly reject her formal teachings, or if you call her hierarchs heretical for proclaiming them. If you deny Orthodox teaching that Christians and Muslims worship the same God, even if you say it in a limited, imperfect sense, that's affirmed by Gregory of Palamas, Patriarch Bartholomew, and on and on. You are no longer in a Pasadena, Sam. Let me just say this. You're no longer representing Orthodoxy when you make the claims that they're making. You got your own private little sect there, your own little cult.
You'll have an objection from Orthodox sources where people would say, well, aren't the Orthodox in the same camp as Catholics here? Because we have various patriarchs who have come out and said, you know, in their statements that there's a worship of the same God for Christians and Christians and Muslims. I would say no. The reason why is because the way authority works within Orthodoxy and Catholicism is very different. Yeah. Orthodoxy is based upon, and I'm drawing from the work of Craig Trullier here, a very good book, The Rise of the Papacy, Rise and Fall of the Papacy. And he uses a terminology which captures exactly how Orthodoxy in the first millennium saw authority. There was a consensus-based epistemology and ecclesiology. And so how Orthodox operate is through consensus. And so things are binding for Orthodox when there's a consensus of the church on a matter. And this is normally expressed in a conciliar context. And so, for example, if there was a council of all of the Orthodox bishops who came together and declared that there is the same God of Muslims and Christians, then that will be something which is binding upon the consciousness of Orthodox. And so one patriarch coming out and saying something is not binding. That is something which is a personal opinion, a theological opinion that a certain individual has, but it doesn't have to be binding. And so Orthodox are based upon truth being discerned consensually in a conciliar context, and authority and declarative statements being done consensually, again, within a conciliar context. And so if a statement is made outside of those boundaries, then it's not actually something which is binding. So it doesn't matter if you just pick out one patriarch. Patriarchs do not have the same authority that Roman Catholics have. Roman Catholics are bound by canon law to assent to the teachings of the magisterium, infallible or not. So if the Pope comes out and says something at a teaching context, not in even the chair of Peter ex cathedra, but if he comes out and teaches something within a council, that is binding upon the consciousness of the Catholics. If a patriarch comes out and teaches something, that is not binding. That is something which needs to be taken on board because he is a patriarch, but it's not binding. And you can see this very clearly in the first millennium. Think about if it was the case that a patriarch of Constantinople comes out and says something, then we will all be Nestorians, because Nestorius was a bishop of Constantinople. He came out and was teaching that, you know, the son, he was teaching that against the Theotokos being the God bearer. And if it was that just a statement of someone coming out and saying this was the case, then we will all be Nestorians. That's obviously not the case, because it was only when the consensus of the church came together to declare something that is taken to be binding. And that hasn't happened with this, even though you've had influential figures in the church say things. They are taken as theological opinions, which should be taken on board and wrestled with, but they can be critiqued and corrected the same way that the church has corrected things like Nestorianism and other things like that. Last thing now with Gregory Palamas. Gregory Palamas, very influential, very important, very authoritative within Orthodoxy. And his teaching was also taken up in certain pan-Orthodox councils, which took his teaching to be authoritative for Trinitarianism, Trinitarian thinking and general Orthodox thinking. So you cannot just put him to the side as you might be able to do with the patriarch or something like that, as such, because he is a saint in the church and he's also authoritatively received by the consensus of the church. However, you have to remember, when the councils did take on board what the teaching of Palamas to be authoritative was, that was his Trinitarian theology and also his understanding epistemologically concerning about the essence and energies distinction. Yeah. So it wasn't saying you have to take on every single thing on board that Palamas was stating, because he might not have been teaching things. So Palamas might have said something, you could say, oh, because Palamas said this, okay, I need to hold this because the council said no. Of course not. What was he declaring? What was he teaching? And he was within a context of debating and being oppressed by Muslims. And so obviously he was communicating with them, but he wasn't teaching authoritatively that that this was the position of a Trinitarian, that you have to hold to this, or to hold to the essence energies distinction, you have to hold to this. That wasn't the case. What the councils were affirming was that he's correct when it comes to the distinctions that he was speaking about and about his Trinitarian theology. And that's what needs to be received for Orthodox. And so again, just bringing up that councils affirmed it doesn't necessarily mean that that's the case about every single thing that he said, because where do you draw the line about what should be taken on board or not? And also as well, sorry, last thing here, think about this in the first millennium. Gregory of Nyssa believed in a form of universalism. Does that mean that because Gregory of Nyssa's theology was received by the Council of Constantinople and it was received by the church, we have him even being stated that we should hold to Damasus and Gregory of Nyssa's theology? Does that mean that we also should affirm his universalism? Everyone would say, no, that wasn't the case. They were saying about his Trinitarian theology was what needed to be received, not necessarily every single thing that they were thinking about. Because again, people can hold to things that might not be correct at a church level. The church receives the consensus of the fathers as teaching that is then affirmed at a binding level. And so because a father might say certain things, that doesn't necessarily mean that that's what's taken to be binding on the consciousness of the Orthodox. So just want to say that Catholics and Orthodox are not in the same position here. So the challenge that I've raised in this article is a challenge for Catholics, because they have to affirm and they have to assent to the position that Christians and Muslims worship the same God. But if we understand what the two essences are of the two concepts that are put forward in the Christianity and Islam, and if we understand how reference actually works, and this is grounded upon a very widely accepted form of reference philosophically, there's a big philosophical challenge for someone to affirm that Christians and Muslims do worship the same God. No, they don't. They don't, and the church has affirmed that for a millennia and 2 millennia, and I would say that we have good philosophical grounds for doing that.